Hello, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks to Anne-Marie and Anna for making all of this happen, and I appreciate the wonderful setup by Heather and Bridget. Really interesting work, and obviously super relational work. What I want to be talking about, I'm going to share my screen, and I can only do one thing at a time, so there we go. You should be able to see that. Is thinking about how to do this kind of relational work, whether it's ungrading, whether it's active learning, whether it is faculty or staff, student connections, all those sorts of things in very large classes. And what I'm going to be presenting draws upon two books that I've written with colleagues. One called Relationship Rich Education that came out in November 2020 from Johns Hopkins with my colleague Leo Lambert. Then the other book came out just last summer. It's called Connections Are Everything, a Student's Guide to Relationship Rich Education. If you go to the QR code that's on the screen, it'll take you to a web page for that book. The good news about that book is you could buy it from Johns Hopkins University Press if you really wanted to, but you shouldn't because it is open access and free forever for everyone. Because we didn't want to write a book that was intended to help students and for student readers and assume they're going to pay $40 American or whatever that is in your context to use the book. So if you go to that site, you can get to the free version of the book, or you can just Google Connections Are Everything. And those books come out of decades of research in the United States, but in many, many other contexts around the world that demonstrate when you're looking at undergraduate education, the most important factor, or among the most important factors in student learning and student motivation and student well-being, their sense of belonging, success, as Bridget and Heather were talking about closing equity gaps, most important factors always include the quality of relationships students form with their instructor and with their peers in the class. And so these books are meant to say, well, if we know that's true from decades of research, why don't we act that way? Why don't we design our courses and our modules that way? Why don't we design our institutions as if relationships were really central? And the student book builds on a lot of research, especially in the United States, but elsewhere, that says students who are first in their family to attend university, in particular, students who are first in their family to attend university, don't understand that these relationships are going to help them in their learning. They tend to think of university learning in a very transactional way. I'm going to receive the information from the instructor and give it back to them unharmed, and then I'll do well and pass through. So part of what we're trying to do in the Connections Are Everything book is help students understand that these relationships really matter. So what I'm going to do now is share a little bit of the research that we have done, which is based on almost 500 interviews with students, faculty, and staff in American higher ed. And I'm going to actually ask for 2 volunteers here. If you would volunteer in the chat, what you're volunteering to do is just read a quote from a student that we interviewed at one point. I'll tell you when the time is right. I just can't see your name. So Anne-Marie or Anna will tell me who's going to read the quotes when the time is right. Oh, there we go. Maybe I can see. So if we get any volunteers, thank you. And if there's one more, that's great. And then Martina will read the second one. Perfect. Okay, so before I get to that, just point out a couple big things from all of this research, ours and many, many other people in many other contexts in the US and internationally. First is that if we're thinking about students having relationship-rich experiences because this is so important for their learning, their well-being, and their success, those have to happen in our courses. We cannot rely on students building meaningful, educationally purposeful relationships outside of the classroom, whether that's a virtual classroom or a face-to-face. It has to be in our classes. The problem is, and that's why this group is so exciting, there's just way too many students. If you're teaching, as Heather was, 120 in a semester, that's a lot. If you're teaching, like some of the people we interviewed, 2,000, 3,000 students in a term, it's completely impossible to imagine that everything that's going to happen is one-on-one with the instructor. So please, as you think about this work, one-on-one relationships with the instructor are great, but they are not scalable. What is scalable is peer relationships. So in some ways, the key message I want to be sharing here is that our classrooms, the way we teach, the way we design our courses, the way we assess our courses, need to really encourage students, support students, motivate students to connect meaningfully in educationally purposeful ways with their peers. Let me give you an example of what this can sound like from one of the students we interviewed. The student we interviewed, his name is Jose Robles. He was a student at Nevada State College, which is outside Las Vegas, Nevada. And his first year, he studied nursing. He's actually graduated now. We interviewed him in 2021. So he is a working nurse now. First generation college student, so first in his family to attend university. And the curriculum in nursing at Nevada State required him to take a non-life sciences science course his first year. And Jose said he thought that was stupid. He was not excited about being in this course. It was going to be a large course. It didn't seem like it was connected to his major for him. He was forced to do though by the curriculum, so he signed up for this course. He said because it was offered at the most convenient time possible. That was it. And his goal was to get as high of a mark as possible with doing as little work as he could. The course he signed up for was Introduction to Geology, right? But a year later, when we interviewed him, he described this large course that he didn't want to take as really pivotal in his education. And this is how he described it. Anna, if you could just read his words.
My professor made something as boring as rocks interesting. The passion she had. Her subject was something that she loved. The most important thing is that the class became a community. She made us interact with each other and with the subject. It just came together because of her passion.
Thank you, Anna. And I do the reading thing, just so you know, because it's an equity move. Not everyone can read at the same speed. It's a way to involve students too. So if you're doing this and you're ever using quotes like in our research we do, it can be a good technique. What I want you to notice about Jose's comments is, again, he wasn't motivated or interested in the course, but he became excited about it, and he became excited about the course and committed to the course for two reasons. One is the passion the professor had for the subject and for her teaching, and then secondly, because the professor made the students interact around the subject and with each other. Notice he doesn't say, I spent time with this professor one-on-one, I got to know the professor. Jose never talked to this professor outside of class. But he said her teaching and the way the course was designed, the way the course was assessed was transformational for him because of the relationships with each other and with the material. So we can do this even in large courses without having to be one-on-one. So 3 practices that the research says are really powerful, and let me illustrate in different ways. One is that we need to talk to our students about the value of relationships. Again, especially in the US, the research is very clear. First generation students do not tend to think relationships are going to help them at all. So when there's active learning experiences or things like this in the class, they often won't engage because they think it's a waste of their time. The person who's going to be quoted here, Martine is going to read, is Martha Malale. She teaches at Carleton University in Ottawa in Canada. She teaches very large, up to 1,000 student, introduction to biology courses. She's an amazing teacher. And she said before COVID, she did a lot of active learning, and she noticed some students were marginalized, just wouldn't engage, and that frustrated her. And then during COVID, she was really horrified by how many students were isolated. So she said she changed her pedagogy in really substantial ways. Martina, if you'd read this, please.
I've become an evangelist of friendship. I tell my students that one of the goals of this course, beyond understanding biology, is that you make a friend. A friend's going to help you get through this course and degree. This person might be a colleague throughout your career. They might become your best friend for life. You need to make friends when you're in my class.
Thanks, Martina. And so what Martha says is she talks about this on the first day of class. Every time there's active learning activities going on in the class, she says, get with your smart friends to do this work. She has some collaborative testing, again, with your smart friends. My favorite part of what she does is she has on every exam in the class, she has a 1 point out of 100 question, which is, have you made a friend in the class yet? Yes or no. You get the same point for answering, whether you say yes or no. But if you say yes, she asks you to write the name of your friends in the class. And she said first, she noticed more and more students are writing more and more names. which she feels really good about. But she said the most powerful thing is quite anecdotal, which is when students come to talk to her before class, after class, and office hours, now they almost always come in groups, and they almost always introduce themselves as friends. And she said that never happened before. So just by authorizing students to be friends, to connect with each other purposefully in the class, I think is something really powerful we can do at scale. Second thing we can do, this is just brilliant new research out of Sweden from a professor who teaches very large, so in this case 200 or so students, introductory course in a business university in Sweden. And what she wanted to do is have her students interact, or they do a lot of work in groups. This is a year-long module. They do a lot of work in groups, and she said, when I let my students choose who's in the group, they tend to choose very homogeneous groups. Students, all immigrant students in her case, or all native Swedish students, often students who knew each other before the course began. And she said that does not align with their goals in the business school. The business university, they want students to be able to work in diverse teams really effectively. So she said, I could also assign students to groups, but what she's found when she does that is that student stress goes way up because they're not comfortable working with people who are different than them. They're nervous about this. The groups often are dysfunctional. So she did all this research to look at student-study relationships and what she can do to help students work in diverse groups without stressing them out. And what she found is really brilliant and quite simple. So she has this little matrix: teacher-assigned groups, student-assigned groups, low-stakes work and other so lightly graded or minimally graded work, and high stakes, so more important for the student's course grade work. And what she finds is if she starts the year with teacher-assigned groups doing low-stakes work, and she churns students through multiple groups, so they get to work with lots of peers. And then over time, there's increasingly high-stakes work with student-chosen groups. And she documents in her research that students choose to work with diverse peers, much more diverse than they would have on the first day of class or they had in previous semesters. But their well-being is still high. So she's getting to significant curricular goals in this large enrollment course of helping students develop skills to work with diverse peers. They're learning business material, and they're not getting stressed out. Again, this works very effectively at scale. The last example, those first two were really about peer connections. The last one is just that we matter too, and establishing some degree of some degree of rapport with students, some sense of care for students, some sense that you might be like students is something to think about. And so this is from a really lovely book. The idea is from a really lovely book on teaching large enrollment online courses in the US. All my citations are at the end. The paper related to this is coming early next week. Sorry to be running late. And this is actually a picture I use when I teach history courses. I'm a historian by training. 20th century American history courses, first day of class, first thing we do, I put this image up on the screen and I ask students to get in groups and say, figure out as much as you can about this picture. When was it taken? Where was it taken? It was taken in the United States in the 20th century. So they spend 5 minutes or so puzzling over things. Lots of times they'll notice the car, they'll notice clothes and things like this. Then we debrief. And they tell me what they think about when the picture was taken, who the people are, etc. And they get quite into it because they think it's a competition, it's a puzzle, it's exciting. After they do a little bit of that, I point out the little guy standing in the front's my father. And the car, this is my grandparents and my dad's family. The car is actually the photographer's. My grandparents didn't have enough money to own a car. The house was rented. They were tenant farmers in Wisconsin. My father's the only person in this picture who graduated from secondary school or went to university. And what's interesting about this is it's a comfortable way for me to introduce a little bit about my background. That's my entire introduction. The thing that has surprised me is I've done this now every course I teach since 2020. Students spontaneously send me pictures of their families and tell me stories about their family. So students are connecting my background with their background in really interesting ways. I don't require them to send, I just make the offer. The moral of the story here, and this is another quote from a student, I'll read it, it only takes meeting that one person who ignites a fire within you. That's what the research says too, that the biggest difference for students in their learning, their well-being, their belonging, success, is whether they've developed at least one meaningful to them relationship with a peer or with a staff member at university. Our courses can be that place. It's likely to be a peer, not us, because there's too many of them, but we can do this if we teach cleverly. Here's my resources. Really happy to talk about this in the panel. Thanks for having me.